So I am very pleased today to start our second I.M. Suez lecture series event. This is the second. Last year we had Larry Lingwei Kong talking about Julian Suez's grandfather, who had spent time as an official in Tibet, and he explored this topic on his own with pursuing lots of documentary sources. Let me tell you a little bit about Julian Suez, who sponsored this. He came to the States, to the University of Texas, became an engineer, worked for IBM, and then as he spent time here in New York City, he got to know Jim Chang and Changzhou Wang, and got connected with Columbia University and met Lingwei Kong when he was a graduate student here. And through Lingwei, discovered the kind of forgotten history of his grandfather, who had been an official in Tibet during the Qing dynasty. It kind of played an important role in negotiating between Tibet and the Qing dynasty, and then spent time during the Republican period as well looking at oil fields, I think, in Xinjiang and so forth. So it's really an amazing connection that Lingwei brought out. And the family has also been incredibly supportive of Julian Suez's work. Unfortunately, he was here last year for the inaugural event, but he passed away shortly thereafter. So I just wanted to mention him, and if you want to know more about him, you can find him on the Integrated Tibetan Studies website, his obituary, and some of the important work that he's done. And then, of course, his grandfather had played this important role in influencing China's understanding of Tibet and its diplomatic relations with India during the late Qing and early Republican periods. Now, this year, I'm very pleased to introduce an old friend from our graduates, well, even my graduate student days when Yudru Tsomu was working at the China Tibetology Center in Beijing. We first met in 1997. She's now a full professor at the Center for Tibetan Studies in Sichuan University. She's a native of Kham, but she earned her PhD in Tibetan Studies at Harvard University in 2006, and went on to do a postdoctoral fellowship at Stanford University in 2007. After joining the Center for Tibetan Studies in 2013 as an associate professor, she assumed the role of full professor in 2019. And this year, she's been approved now to advise graduate students, which is a monumental achievement. It's more like Europe, getting through this process in China. So it's really exciting to think about Yudru Tsomu training a new generation of graduate students in China. Her primary academic interests concerned Tibetan history, with a particular focus on the history of Kham, the study of Tibetan society in Kham, and cultural interactions on the Sino-Tibetan borderlands. Through her research, she aims to contribute to a comprehensive understanding of Sino-Tibetan relations, integrating political perspectives with broader historical and cultural exchanges. Her book, Blind Warrior of Nyarong, The Rise of Gompa Namgyal in Kham, was published by Lexington Books in 2014. Also, she's authored many articles exploring the construction of images of Eastern Tibet, Kham, by intellectuals during the Republican period, the Guozhong trading houses, the activities of Tibetan middlemen and women in Darzido, Kangding, and also the role of women as chieftains in modern Kham history. She's here today to talk about her latest book. I'll just hold up the flyer here. You guys can all pick up the discounted copy is 35% off, which you will need because it's incredibly expensive to buy a hard copy. I apologize. I am the series editor for this series, but we can't drive that. It's a trade press, and to publish monographs, you all understand the situation. Columbia University Press is partly subsidized by a university. With a trade press like this, it's fully has to support itself, so it's very expensive. But with a 35% off discount, you should snap up a copy while you can. So she'll be talking to us today about chieftains, lamas, and warriors published just this year. And finally, I want to thank Lauren Hartley and the Weatherhead East Asian Institute and the Modern Tibetan Studies program there for co-hosting this event. As I'm on sabbatical, they've done the lion's share of organizing, and I'm just here to introduce and moderate. So I look forward to your talk and then discussion afterwards. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you, Gray, for the nice introduction. And I would also like thank both Gray and Lauren for inviting me to give a talk here, especially making all the arrangements for the travel. And that's a project in itself, yeah. Before I start my talk, I actually want to share with you an anecdote. When I was first invited to give the talk in this lecture series, I didn't know that diplomat Yumin-Su was somebody I actually came across in my study. So 3 weeks ago, I saw Ning Wei Kong and from Academia Sinica, and I asked him, said, by the way, how do you write Yumin-Su's name in Chinese? And he told me it's Shi Yumi. I said, oh my gosh, I read about him when I was doing research for my second chapter. So I feel a special connection, yeah? It's kind of a karmic connection, and so it's my really great honor to talk about my new book. What I want to do is really spend a few minutes to introduce to the geography of Kham to you, and also its importance in Sino-Tibetan relations. So if I borrow a cultural geography term, Kham will be a perceptional region. So without any fixed boundaries, like what do we understand? Sometimes people ask me, where Kham ends, where Kham start? And I do not have a clear answer. The reason is more perceptional, and people are still debating which parts should be Kham. But January census is here, the map, I think you can see slightly better. When we talk about Kham, we will look at the Zhichu River, the Yangtze River, and then to the west, we usually call it Western Kham. To the east is Eastern Kham. And starting from the early 18th century, the Western Kham was under the jurisdiction of the Lhasa government. The Eastern Kham was under the nominal control of the Sichuan governor. And so you would see that Kham as an interface, it had always been interface between our two great powers. So this geographical location really greatly affects the unfolding of Kham history. So when I did my book, the research about the Gombo Nangje, the same theme had gone through the entire book. And this theme also continued in my new book. So whenever there were disputes, local disputes in Kham, one party would turn to Central Tibet, the other would turn to Qing China, or later the nationalists. And so what kind of decisions they made, depending on their own local circumstances and their own loyalty. So that's what part in this talk, because it's very short. So what I'm going to highlight in my talk is all these local Khamba agency during the first half of the 20th century, different events, and I'm going to highlight that. And then I'll leave more time for discussion and the question for clarification. Otherwise, I have in my book have so many different incidents. So in the event, Gombo Nangje's rise of Gombo Nangje would be a very convenient point for me to talk, because as I mentioned, early 18th century, you have Western Kham controlled by the Lhasa government, Eastern Kham under Sichuan. But with the rise of Gombo Nangje, this all changed. So Gombo Nangje was defeated by the Lhasa government in 1865, and then the Lhasa government was able to establish the Nyarong Jichep, Nyarong Commissioner's Office, in the next year. This allowed the Lhasa government to have a stronghold in the part of the Eastern Kham. And so this caused really great fear among the Qing court and also some of the governors, the Sichuan governors. They worry about how the imposition of the Nyarong Jichao the authority will impact their control of Kham. And so it actually did happen that, again, the same theme that whenever have local disputes, they tend to either, and then it really escalated into a major conflict. So this greatly affects how the Qing governors, Sichuan governors, to view the frontier. They start to view the frontier as under influence of the newly globalizing concept, what Scott Riley discussed in his dissertation. I think he argued that Lu Chuanning was under the influence of a newly globalizing concept of sovereignty, territoriality, and some of the new international law. So he actually proposed saying, let's carry out the Gaitu Guiliu reform of replacing all these indigenous leaders with government civilian officials in Dege and Nyarong in as early as 1895 to 1896. But due to the opposition from the court, from Anban, he was not successful. But this idea, what I talked about, the concept of sufficient control to prove sovereignty, actually impact the new forward policies carried out in both Kham and Central Tibet from 1904 to 1911. And so at the time, their aim was, their goal was to establish Sichuan province, so that to prove sufficient control to prove sovereignty. So this laid, in a way, laid the background for what I'm going to talk about in my book, also this talk. So you would see that the Chinese nationalists, they continued they sought to tame and fully incorporate Kham into the new nation states. So they were treating the Khambas as 少数民族 minority subjects. On the other hand, you have Central Tibet with the 13th Dalai Lama. He sought to regain the lost territory, what they wrote in, what they had in the official document, the lost territory that occupied by some of the Chinese troops, frontier troops, still stationing in Western Kham. And for them, the Khambas were co-nationalists and co-nationals. So in a sense, this created a great contestation of control of Kham during this period. So I list 4 major players here. First one, Lhasa government, of course. The second one is the Chinese nationalist government. The third one, Chinese World New Wenhui. But on top of that, I think in my talk and in my book, I also emphasize the agency of the local modern educated elite. They became also a major force to really contend for the control of Kham. They had the Kham for Khamba movement. So, Kham for Khamba movement. Okay. So next, what I'm going to do is to really go very briefly to highlight the Khamba agency or local agency in the 3 major conflicts. The very first one is from 1912 to 1913. I think I briefly touched upon it because with the 13th Dalai Lama, with the collapse of the Qing, this afforded the Lhasa government, especially 13th Dalai Lama, an opportunity to drive out all the Chinese troops and the Chinese officials. At the same time, he was also, because of his experience in exile, both in China and also in India, he started to also carry out similar to state building projects. So one of his most far-reaching, important project was to establish a Dome Jichao. And so this was the first time in Tibetan history you have a Jichao with the term Dome referring to Kham area. And so for Dome Jichao, the goal was to establish an administrative system within the Western Kham. In addition to that, they want to recover all these territories lost to the Chinese. And so during this time, equipped with modern arms and also some modern trainings, they were able to really recapture majority of the polities in Western Kham. But under Yuan Shikai, they sent a Western expedition led by Yin Changhen. They beat them back. So eventually, there was a stalemate, in the Ruchi area. to the west, west Kham. And here, what I want to really draw your attention to the Khamba agency is the Hotso Socho Sogu. It's the 39 tribes of Ho. In the map, it's not very clear, but it's in Western Kham, and they were consist of nomadic, very fierce, autonomous nomadic tribes, and they were under the control of Anban in Lhasa. So when the Tibetan Lhasa troops captured the regions of Hotso Socho Sogu, the 39 tribes of Ho, they were not happy because for Lhasa they had direct, very heavy taxation and everything. So they actually turned to Panjishan, the Chinese garrison commander stationed in Chengdu, for help. So Panjishan actually drove the Lhasa troops out of certain tribes. So this would be one of the examples. I think I will come back again and again for different polities would seek help from either center depending on their own agenda, their own circumstances. So for the time, the second one I want to talk about is the major conflict, Sino-Tibetan conflict, 1917, 1918. Some of you probably also familiar with Kham mediated this. And so this was a very minor incident over the dispute over the right of cutting cross. As I mentioned, they had a stalemate in Ryuchi. So this minor incident was mishandled by Panjishan, and so eventually it really escalated into a major conflict. And so here, the Tibetan troops, again, I think armed with Western, like British weapons and also better training and better provision, they were able to capture these regions like Dege, Beiyu, Denko, Sishu, and Nyarong in Eastern Kham. Yeah. And so Dege, Beiyu, Denko, Sishu, these were the 4 counties under the jurisdiction of Dege, and that they were the loyal supporters of Nyarong Jichao back in 19th century. And then Nyarong, of course, under Nyarong Jichao. So they were able to really capture these regions. But here, what I want to highlight again is who sided with whom. So very first one I want to talk about is the Daji monastery. So it's one of the most, the wealthiest monastery in northern Kham. In Ganzi area, in Tibetan we call Hokonga. So 5, Ganzi and Beri, all these. So they actually sided with the Lhasa government. And so the reason is they had a stronger connection with the monasteries like Sera, Trebon, all these. They sent their traditional religious connection. In addition to that, they were very active in 13th Dalai Lama's campaign to drive out the Chinese troops, officials. Some of the Daji monks in 1912, they were actively involved in Lhasa in this. So 13th Dalai Lama actually appointed abbot of Daji monastery, also appointed a military official in Tibetan Dabun, so had a really close relationship. So no wonder they would support the Tibetan army. But there were other polities actually fought on the side of the Chinese. Hotso Socho Sogu, I already mentioned, they did that. But the second group is the Garalama Sonan Rabde from Ryuchi Monastery. I think Grace spoke talking about him as a political commissioner. So he, from Ryuchi, Garalama and the Jidong, they supported the Panjishan, the Chinese. However, Shabdung Rinpoche actually supported the Lhasa government. So you would see it's a divided loyalty even within the same monastery. So I really want to draw your attention to that to show the Khamba agency. I'm going to skip the Chengdu truce, but one thing is that this was a great victory for the Lhasa because during the truce mediated by, I think, Kham, they actually granted the 13th Dalai Lama the right to appoint abbot in monasteries that in the Eastern Kham, which was under jurisdiction of the Sichuan. So this was a big gain for the Lhasa. So let's look at the third one. And so I put Daji Beri dispute. But the reason is, again, it's a local dispute. dispute over property and the stewardship of the Beriking eventually led into a major Sino-Tibetan war, I think it's more fierce than in the first two. And this had a lot to do saying why suddenly Daji Monastery and the Beri had disputed. It need to trace back to the, saying how Daji Monastery obtained this property from the Beri king. It had a lot to do with the Nyaro Lama, who was reincarnated Lama of a home monastery of the Beri king. So he enjoyed, I think he had the joint stewardship of the Beri kingdom, but when the old chief passed away, the new chief refused to honor that. So she tricked him to render all his official documents and refused to return to him. So the Nyaro Lama made a very tactic move. He decided to offer 15 taxpayer families to the Daji monastery. And there's a reason for it, because this Lama, he was from Sangduchang family, the most famous trading family, and Sangduchang was patron of Daji monastery. So in the event, after he offered this to the Daji monastery, Daji monks wanted to take control of the position, and the Beri king contested. So both parties turned to the Chinese magistrate in Ganzi for settlement, but the magistrate didn't do anything. So eventually, I think Daji monks got impatient. They attacked, and they captured the Nyaro monastery and also captured 5 towns in Beri. Again, Beri king turned to the Chinese troops for help. Daji turned to the Tibetan. So this really escalated into a major war. And so eventually Tibetans, in early 1931, the Tibetan Lhasa troop actually occupied the Ganzi. That's where both the Beri and the Daji monastery was located. And also in Ganzi and the Nyarong and the Dango, all in eastern Kham. And so they were very successful. And at the time, but the nationalists initially negotiated with them and had an agreement, greatly favored them, saying they should have control over both Nyarong, Ganzi, and Dango, this region. And then the warlord, I think not only the Sichuan warlord, Liu Wenhui, but also Ma Bufang, they all opposed it. And also some of the elites I'm going to talk about later, they also opposed this. So eventually, the nationalists had to repudiate the agreement, and so I think I'll leave it as here. So next, what I'm going to do is really look through the 4 Khamba rule for Kham movement, and as I mentioned in the beginning of my talk, I said they became a major force to contend for the control of Kham. So this is a picture of Gesang Tsiren, and he was from Batang, and he was considered to be one of the most representative modern educated elite. He went to Huaxi, this South China primary school run by missionaries. He studied in Kunming. Then he ended up working for Mongolia and Tibetan Affairs, Mongolian Tibetan Affairs Commission. And so he was one of them, I would say, as a modern educated elite. He climbed the social ladder by his education in Chinese, and also his activities, most of his political activities before he went back in 1932 was in Nanjing. So he was director of the Tibetan Affairs for the national government. So they became very vocal for Kham movement, and he was actually the very first one to propose Khamba rule of Kham during this period in 1932. So in 1931, he was appointed as what they call it, a commissioner in charge of the party affairs in Kham by the nationalist government. And at the time, Chiang Kai-shek or the nationalist government, they wanted him to establish branch offices of the Nationalist Party in different parts of Kham in order to circumvent or check the growing power of warlord Liu Wenhui. So when he was sent back, Liu Wenhui was very wary of his activities. Then Liu Wenhui's troops stationed in Batang, they actually killed his secretary. In response to that, Gesang actually called on, for the first time proposed Kham for Khamba slogan and called on all these Tibetan indigenous chiefs, also Lamas in Bachudening, not only in Batang, in other parts like in Daba, all these in Chaten, in southern part of the eastern Kham. And so he called himself as the commander-in-chief of the, the Khamba Self-Defense Corps. And then he also proposed to establish his own version of Sichuan province. So eventually, he was attacked by both the Lhasa troops and also Liu Wenhui's troops. So in the end, he actually sided with Liu Wenhui to fight against the Lhasa. And later, he was defeated and disarmed. His followers disarmed first some of the troops, garrison troops. But later, Liu Wenhui sent troops really defeated all his supporters, and he fled back to Nanjing. So this is the very first one. The second, So this Khamba for Kham movement actually revived by two of the Banda brothers, and this picture is not very clear, but it's from Khamba TV station. So you have Banda Topje, Banda Raka, Banda Yampe, and the two of the brothers. They actually revived the Khamba for Kham movement in 1934. And so especially the sources I read about Banda Topje, he was the commander of Mangkang, Dabe. And so he harbored anti-Lhasa stance because due to the perceived unfair treatment by the Lhasa officials. And so in 1934, after the Second Dalai Lama passed away, and with the power shift in Lhasa, they feared that their old brother would be in danger. So they actually revolted against the Lhasa government. And they used the same slogan to call on support from all, from other Kham leaders. And they were based in Mangkang, so in the western Kham. But they were not as successful as Gesang. They actually very few people, except their near vicinity, close to their region, very few actually responded. And here they proposed what they call 8-point political programs, and then they emphasized regional autonomy, combat control, and equality. And I think Gesang proposed similar things. So eventually, they were quickly suppressed, and both brothers, they went into exile, in Boko in Batang. But Banda Dorje continued to champion the Kham for Khamba movement. So the last one I want to, the next one is the Gara Lama. I already mentioned that. He was, when he was in exile, in China, and then he was actually hoping that with the nationalist support, he would be able to return to Ruochi in Western Kham. And so in 1935, he was awarded the Pacification Commissioner of the Western borderland, similar to the Ninth Manchen Lama's title, to publicize the nationalist policy. So the nationalists government were hoping to use him as an instrument, politicized his role, saying expanding the nationalist influence and then check the growth of, again, the Liu Wenhui's power and authority. And eventually, one of his tasks was to block the advancement of the Red Army. And so in the sources, he actually did much more than any of the earlier ones. He had held a general assembly calling all the Kham chieftains, including Dege, Chala, all these. And so he publicized the Kham for Kham movement. In addition to that, he actually had his followers disarmed most of the I think 3 counties here are listed here. Zhangguo, Ganzi, Dege, 3 counties. He disarmed the troops. He expelled them, and he appointed his own magistrate. And one of the female magistrate he appointed was Judge Chimidroma, in Kham history, the very first one. And so in an event, the Red Army captured him, and he died in custody. That's ended his movement. The last movement, I'm not going to dwell, but the last movement is called the Ganzi incident. And so this is a picture of Kansa Dechinwamu. So this event would trace back to the 9th Panchen Lama's effort to return to central Tibet. So when he passed away in Jekongdo, the Panchen Lama's headquarters, they were facing with the problem what to do next. So Niu Jiaji is his Chinese name, but Tibetan name is Gesang Chunzhou, who was like the Gesang Tsirin, who was a nationalist government like official, who was also considered to be a modern educated elite. He was behind this. And so in the event, they made a tactical move. They decided to move the 9th Panchen Lama's remain and the headquarters with the bodyguard unit to Ganzi in northern, nowadays in Ganzi County, in Ganzi Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture. So Dechinwamu actually fell in love. It's a very romantic story with the bodyguard of the Panchen Lama's headquarters. So they decided to get married, and Niu Wenhui got heard about the news, and he worried that the 9th Panchen Lama's headquarters and then would establish a very strong block in northern Kham, northern part of eastern Kham. And so he decided to put Dechinwamu under house arrest. And this triggered the last Kham for Khamba movement. So the 9th Panchen Lama's headquarters, together with militias under Kansa. Kansa, I think I mentioned, that's one of the 5 horse states in Ganzi. They fought. They decided to fight against Niu Wenhui. But eventually, early in 1940, they were defeated. They went into exile. So this ended the 4th Kham for Khamba movement. So what I'm going to do next is say, let's see, like all these different movements, what do they have in common? The first one I want to emphasize is that all the leaders of the movement, from my sources about Gesang Tsirin, also Garalama, under Garalama, there's another Jiang Anxi, Tibetan name is Losang Dundru, who was the uncle of Baba Phuntsung Wanji. They were all behind this Khamba for Kham movement. And very strongly, you can see that they adopted the Sun Yat-sen's 3 principles of people. And by the way, I think Banda Rabka translates that into Tibetan. And so Gesang Tsirin wrote many articles published in journals. And so they also, in a way, adopted his nationalist liberation ideology, but they applied it to the Kham region. So this is the very first thing they have in common. The second thing is all of them throughout, maybe except the Banda revolt, the rest of them, they leverage their Khamba identity, and as well as a nationalist government official against the Niu Wenhui, outsider Niu Wenhui. This is the second thing. Third thing is, except Banda Dorji, most of them, they were members of Mongolian Tibetan Affairs Commission, so under the national government. So you would see this was an alliance between the local Khamba modern educated elite and the merchant elite, represented by the Banda family, with the nationalists to wrest control over Kham from both Lhasa government and the Niu Wenhui's government. So you will see their goal, I say, to assert local power, aim to drive out both the Lhasa rule and the Chinese warlord Niu Wenhui's rule. They strove for creating a unified Khamba identity based on ethnicity and establish a province within the Republic of China. They were not seeking for any independence or anything. They want to work within the Chinese political framework. So in a sense that in my book, I try to analyze saying how this movement came about. So I would argue it emerged from the global discourses of self-determination and nationalist thinking. So I'm not going to dwell on it, but as you can see, Kham was not immune to all these global changes, and this had a great impact on Kham history. So let's look at the reason why they fell. Yeah, except Gesanteren, he was able to mobilize neighboring regions, including Batang, Chachen, Daba, all these in southern part of Eastern Kham. But the rest of them, they were unable to do so. I think we really need to, this was due to the very fragmented geography of Kham, also very localized Kham identity. And so when Gesanteren proposed the Kham for Kham movement, in Tibetan he had two terms. One is Khampe Rangsi Rangjung, so he's saying self-rule by Khampe. The other one he used is Khampe Rangde Rambe. So for Khambas, the Khambas ruled by their own chief. So you already see that paradox there. So in a sense, it's very difficult for Khamba polities who were fighting over resources, constantly engaging in banditry, feuding, to really overcome the decentralized loyalty. So a lot of them, it's very difficult for them to imagine there would be a pan-Khamba identity based on the ethnicity. Yeah. So in that sense, I think that's one of the reasons that they were not so successful with common people. So this Khamba rule for Kham movement actually restricted to the modern educated elite and the merchant class like Bandachang. Okay. I think I'm doing fine with time. Okay. So what I want to spend the next 10 minutes or so is that in my book, I also borrowed what Bola, the process during the Republican period, what he termed as imperial. So he said the process, he described going imperial, that is, the new Chinese nation would frequently adopt imperial practices and ideologies in their effort to assert central control in periphery areas. This included gaining of official titles, patronizing religious figure, and offering political, military, and financial support to local elites. For those of us who study about borderland, this sounds very familiar. Yeah. So I saw this process in Kham during this period. So I'll share with you some examples. So first of all, the Chinese warlord period from 1916 to 1927. I saw during this period, even though, especially in Eastern Kham, it was under control of the warlord era, but constantly you would find that this warlord, they would not be able to function without relying on the local indigenous leaders. So this had a lot to do with the warlord period. The authority of the Chinese was really greatly weakened, because this was a period characterized by internal strife, competing warlord factions, frequent changes in garrison commanders, and widespread mutinies due to unpaid soldiers and lack of supplies. In sources, you will read pages of mutinies because they were not paid. So in that sense, during this period, anybody who were sent to be magistrate in this part, they had to rely on the indigenous chiefs and headmen, even though their titles were stripped off by Zhao Feng and all these. But in fact, they gave them new titles. So exactly like what Bola said, going imperial, you use the imperial practices. So one area in my book, it became very prominent, is the Chachen area. They had been so autonomous, independent. So mid-1930s, until mid-1930s, they were not able to post a magistrate there. They were either killed or driven. So in the book, I have a chart of who were killed, who were driven out. And so with any of the magistrates, whoever want to rule the region, they had to rely on the local chieftains and headmen. So here I give a few examples. One is, I only single out two major chieftains. One is Dege. Dege, for the former Dege king, he was actually he was sent into exile in Bataan. And then with the collapse of the Qing, later he was able to return to Dege, and he restored his rule in 1915. So all these local, at the time, the local Chinese magistrates, they had to rely on him to do basically two things. One is, I think Elizabeth Randall wrote about the convoy labor. So they had to arrange the transportation conveys through this, through him. So he was given titles. I think that the title, it's very, very interesting. You can see is Indigenous Battalion Commander and a Commissioner in charge of convey labor and grain tax. So basically, they had to rely on him for collecting taxes as well. So the other example I gave is the Jala King. In Chinese, Minzheng Tusi, Tibetan Jala King. With the collapse of Qing, he was not able to restore his power authority over all the region he used to rule, but only in Dazhengdou area. So they also had to rely on him for the administration. So he was given titles like Baozheng. It's another new title as a headman. And also, he was even appointed to be a magistrate for Litang, not for Dazhengdou, in 1917, very briefly. And then you can see that he served as the investigator of the Yi Tibetan situation for the frontier commissioner and as the head of the newly established Buddhist society. So the last one, he was appointed as peace emissary on behalf of the Sichuan frontier commissioner to negotiate with the Lhasa government. And I think in Tekman, he wrote extensively about him. So you can see that even though they were dispatching magistrates to rule the eastern Kham, but they still need to rely on all these indigenous chiefs. Okay, so what about the Shikam period? Because anyone who wrote Shikam from 1939 to 1949, I only list these few, but in my book you will get a long list of the appointments given to different type of Tibetan chieftains, headmen, depending on, and they had a very good idea who had power, bigger power than bigger title. So here, very interesting, the Jala King, Jala King, the one who was the peace missionary, he passed away, his son. So in the archival document, in Chinese, they say former Jala King. And his name is Penzo Nanje. He was given like a title like transportation captain. So when my book first came out, and some of my colleagues asked, say, what kind of power did the transportation captain have? So actually, he had much more power than we imagined. Part of the reason is he would be the one who arranged all the convoy labor. So any Chinese officials or Tibetan officials who would travel through Kham, they had to rely on these like Jala King, it's a transportation captain to arrange the yaks, arrange the guide, everything. And so I cannot emphasize enough. It's like, I think in Youtai Riji, the Anban's diary, he actually requests the court saying, can I go through India instead of traveling through the Kham? So many jabas, yeah, so many like bandits, yeah. And so you can see that, and there are many in Chinese sources. You would find some Anbans or later some officials. They were delayed because of that. So I put some former Gotang King, Nanje Penzo, from my home region. He was given commander of militia battalion, and they knew that he was more powerful than the Jala king, even though they had marriage alliances. So they gave him higher position. So I list a lot of him there, here because of time constraint. I'm not going to go over, but I want to emphasize that they actually gave titles to the head lamas of different monasteries, especially want to propagate Buddhism and all this. So, okay, so how about Lhasa? So I mentioned that Lhasa was establishing the Dome Jichel, and they were also engaging in their own state building projects. So Dome Jichel actually were very active starting from 1918. Before that, Dome Jichel, and from 1913 to 1918, they were busy fighting. And so in the end, when they had the truce, Chengdu truce, so they started to really build up the Dome Jichel. So it became very central to the Lhasa's modern administrative system. So oversees 15 counties and 4 monastic fiefdoms, like including Chengdu and like Bashui and Zhayao, Ruqi, all these. And so start to directly levy taxes and labor. So in a sense that I also want to say that despite the Lhasa's direct rule, real power often remained in the hands of some of the local headman chieftains. So one of the prominent examples is Lato Jebu. He was actually appointed as a magistrate for his own regime. And his rule really lasted for a long period of time until 1950s. So this also indicates that the limits of the Lhasa assimilation efforts. So let me wrap up my talk here. So part of the reason I emphasize the local agency is not because I only saw the local agency. It's just a way for me to put together my talk. I want to emphasize that whatever local agencies they had to operate within the cultural or political milieu of the time. So I would, for my conclusion, I would say Kham was not merely a transit zone, but a dynamic frontier where distinct identities, power structure, and the historical narratives were actively forged. In the first half of the 20th century, it faced assimilation pressure from both the Qing Chinese states and Lhasa government. Yet they consistently demonstrate its own agency. So in this talk, I have traced this agency and identities through the early 20th century, examining how political vacuum, military advancement, local resistance, and shifting alliances highlighted Kham's vital role in a period of intense geopolitical flux. So in particular, during the 3 major Sino-Tibetan conflicts from 1912 to 1932, I have shown above some Khamba polities actively assisted the Chinese to safeguard their own independence from Lhasa and others sided with the Lhasa government against the Chinese authorities. So this illustrates Kham's internal political diversity and its capacity to shape its own future rather than passively accept assimilation from either side. And the same localized identity also render all the Kham for Kham movements failure as well. Yeah. And so the diffused power structure of Kham and its strong local identity, which sought to maintain the power and the privileges of local chieftains, their families and clients render efforts by both the Qing and Lhasa and also the modern elites ineffective. In sum, we can argue that Kham was not a passive periphery, but a critical frontier that continuously influenced policies, strategies, and historical narratives of both Central Tibet and successive Chinese regimes. The persistent agency of the Khamba people, from traditional chieftains strategically aligning for local interests to modern elite pursuing self-rule to common people launching widespread revolts against the Qing, was fundamental in shaping regional and national outcomes. And thank you very much.
So now we'll have some discussion. Tsomu and I, and then I'll open it up for questions. So you all be thinking of questions. So I guess when I read your book, I thought of, so many new, I knew a little bit about some of these figures, but you really open up the view on some of these Kham figures. And one of the things that I think is a big shift is because you're taking Khampa agency so seriously, it challenges national, perspectives, either Chinese nationalist perspectives or Tibetan nationalist perspectives that have kind of missed or dismissed these figures that played such a key role. So I wanted to see if you could talk about how you opened up these key figures, who the three outlined here today, that started these Kham rule for Khampas, and what some of the new sources, what languages they're in, why that gives us new perspectives, and also, this area is so different. We all know about Phuntsal Wangyal because of Mel Goldstein's interviews and the great book that he put together, but these figures are so much earlier. And so why is this area so different than, say, Central Tibet? Or, Amdo is very close, bordering on Chinese areas as well, but there's something very different going on here. So, and Rinpoche is not close, right? When you're thinking about Gara Lama, it's not a border. It's in Western Kham. So why are these figures so different? Why did they see their interests aligning maybe so differently than other parts of Tibet?
Okay, this is a very good question. Actually, when you think about the core figures of Khampa Khampa movement, I mentioned the Gesant Tsering, then Jiang Anxi, the Baba Penzong's uncle, and then also Gesant Chinjo, who was very active, instrumental in the Ninth Panchen Lama's headquarters. They were all from Bataan. And so I think Bill Coleman wrote a wonderful dissertation to really draw our attention, saying Khamba region is not monolithic. There were so many different regions, and Bataan was a really interesting place, and I can see why Bill wrote his dissertation. It's, I think you will see that in Bataan, starting from the mid-19th century, the nexus of power he discussed actually had many more different players than we usually generally assume. You would have a missionary, as I mentioned, he went to the missionary school. You would have the Niangyuan, the Green Commissariat, and Bataan and Litang were one of the two indigenous Tusi. They were not hereditary. So the Niangyuan would have much more power to either demote them or promote them. So in that sense, this gives the Niangyuan, the commissary, much more power. In addition to that, I think so far in English literature, we have not really looked at this, except Bill did, is merchant group. It's difficult to really define them, whether Tibetan or Chinese. They're half Tibetan, half Chinese merchant group. So you would have the social structure completely different from, say, when I study about the Gompo Nangje. It's really traditional, you would, in Yarong, or the warriors or the tribal leaders or this, you would not see different players like new ones, like merchants or the outside forces like commissary or Niangyuan, Green Commissary, or missionary. So I think it had a lot to do with the Bataan as a unique place where most of the Bataan people, starting from Gesant Tsering, he started to promote for the, he actually, in Nanjing, he had the schools, like a Shikang class to train all these people from Kham, mostly from Bataan, sometimes from my home region, Dazendo as well. So they were very active in Nanjing. They formed their own sojourner group, and they were very actively involved in nationalist politics, or they're dealing with minorities. So I think this is something I think really need to should be talked about more. And as for Gara Lama, was very interesting. I think this maybe also would go well with my theme, saying all these indigenous chieftains or monastic leaders, whenever they were facing with both centers, and a lot of times they would side with either one of them, other, depending on their local interest. For Gara Lama, because it's Ruchi monastery, Gaji monastery in Ruchi, so I didn't have time in the talk to really talk about the history. So when Darfeng entered, Darfeng's expedition, into the Western Kham area, we have Chinese sources, not Tibetan sources, but Chinese sources, often some Tibetan oral sources. They said they welcomed the Qing troops, and therefore their monastery was spared. But other monasteries were sacked and burned. So in a sense that they had a long-term relationship with this Persian troop. And then in 1917, 1918, they fought along with him, and he was exiled. So in a sense that it's remote in Ruchi, but he went into exile like the ninth Panchen Lama in Nanjing, and I think he had some relationship with Liu Xiang, the warlord, and he had extensive Chinese followers like the Panchen Lama. So I think I briefly mentioned that for him, it was very important for him to rely on the support of the nationalist government, allow him to go back to seize the control of the Ruchi. So I think maybe this explains one of the reasons. But Hotu Sochi Sogu, I already mentioned, they had a long tradition of being very independent. And so a lot of times the sources, especially in Chinese sources, they emphasize that, saying the Tibetan Lhasa officials were rapacious or oppressing the people. But in fact, it's because of the different taxation system. So for the Tibetan taxation system was much heavier because you need to provide the ula, you need to also, for the official travel, and also even for monasteries, you also need to provide all kinds, do all the chores, building the monasteries. But under the Chinese control, because they were not so, they still levy some of the grain taxes and also COVID labor, but not as heavy. So I think for the source, you also ask about the sources. For these figures, most of the sources are in Chinese, and a lot of them are their writings published in journal periodicals during the Republican period. Gesang, I was trying to get a hold of to see whether he had any writing in Tibetan. So far, I was not very successful, but I think Gara Lama I might, but it's still, for Gara Lama, it's a little bit difficult. A lot of the writings about him from Chinese sources and also memoirs by his followers. For Bangda brothers, that's really difficult. Not a lot, except I think Carol McGranahan and also interview, and also Melon Tundula from Tibetan University wrote his dissertation about Bangda brothers. So he did a lot of oral interviews. So I cite some of them. What else? Liu Jiaju, yes. Liu Jiaju actually, he had his own, Liu Jiaju Kissinger, his own Tibetan writing. But he was much more, he was Chinese too, right? In Chinese also. He was from Batang as well. And this is something I think it's really making me think about agency of the local Khambas, but you have different groups. These groups, they want to stay within the Republic of China, but then for Baba Phuntsang Wangyal, he was influenced by Leninism. He wanted to have an independent sort of Tibetan state, combining both Khambas and Central Tibet, but within the federation. And then you have Bangda Rabga and all these, they want to have the improvement parties. So I think this shows the diversity of the region itself. And so for Liu Jiaju, yes, he wrote extensively in both Tibetan and Chinese. But very interesting, a lot of the things he wrote is about culture. So he wrote about, in Tibetan also, he collected folk stories and about Batang, about Kham. So
and made songs and so forth.
songs, folk songs, yeah.
Another aspect that I think is really different about Kham, and it's hard to find any evidence of this in other parts of Tibet, but in Kham, and there's still fairly few, but the role of women. Under Gara Lama, he was known to be a kind of pro-women, and the next incarnation started a nunnery that's done very interesting work. But there, under each one of these situations, the Derge kings, sometimes queens, so forth, women. You've talked about the Guozhang, the role that women could play. Why is Kham so different in having county leaders or queens or head women designated? Why is Kham so different than other areas? I mean, in central Tibet, you can't think of one incarnate Lama. Right, but it's. I mean, these are civil leaders. Why is Kham different like this?
This is actually a very good question, because I wrote about these Guozhang trading houses. We saw more female head and also women chieftain, the piece, my preliminary research. One thing I think when I wrote about the Guozhang trading houses, I was sharing with Lauren's class, and at the time it didn't occur to me that in fact the Tibetan, especially the Jarong area, so they had what Malinowski mentioned, the house society, very similar to that, saying that the inheritance of titles, inheritance of properties, everything connect to the family, the household name. And so, and of course, the family, if you had the son would have the first priority to inherit the title, inherit all the responsibilities, like providing covey labor to the government or to the monastery, whoever. But if the brothers decide to become a monk or decide to become a mappa, son-in-laws for other families. So in Kham, frequently the families will choose their daughters to stay at home, and then they would have a son-in-law. And so in my study about the Jagadodeng, the headman under the Dege, he became very powerful because he married into the Larabel family, one of the major headmen. And so as the son-in-law, so the inheritance is more like a bilateral, what you call, not necessarily patrilineal or matrilineal, depending on the situation. Either the daughter or the son could inherit it. And then as soon as a woman marries into the family or a son marries into family, both of them have the equal share. And so that sense that for Guozhang trading houses, like it's been studied by the Chinese ethnologist like in 1940. So he shared a few extreme cases, and one of them is very famous Second Guozhang. It's one of the most important Guozhang trading houses under Jalakin. And so at the turn of the century, I think the late 19th, early 20th century, the owner, the son of the Guozhang family passed away. So the widow married somebody, nomads from beyond the pass, like in Lagang, in this area. And then the widow passed away. The husband married somebody else, like a woman. And then the husband passed away, and then the woman married again. But the name stayed as Second Goba. In Tibetan, it had never really changed. So in that sense, I feel like maybe this type of system allowed the Jarong society, and including some parts of Kham, more leverage when they are facing with no heir. And so for example, the Dege, the Jangambemu, when the Dege king passed away early, Jangambemu became the regent. But because it's a kinship, then they emphasize more on patrilineal. So that's why he had problems with the headman. But for Bun, because in Chinese it's the Tu, but in Tibetan we have Jebu as king, we have Bun, Bunbu chiefs, and then we have all other Deba referring to the Batang Litang. So for others, for Jarong, I think the son-in-law or the daughter-in-law who would have the equal right to inherit the title, everything, worked in the favor of women. So the 3 women chieftains I studied, when they were facing with the problem, especially Kansa Dechengwamu's grandmother, Kansa Yanjin Kangzhu, she was actually considered to be an illegitimate daughter of the Kansa chief. But then when the chief did not have a male, like say a boy, so she was recognized as the chief. So in Jiarong, very common. And I think this system might work in favor of them. I think this in Chinese writings, tribal writings, they were also amazed by, very similar to your questions, so many combat women were so active. Actually, Ren Aichang wrote in his book saying it's sort of like an inverted gender role. So the women were being like perform corvée labor. Women were carrying like loads of tea, like what Patrick Bowes wrote about. So a lot of women, and in addition to that, they were so appalled that women can actually be head of the household. So I think this need to be more research, but at least that system might have allowed them to, like if you compare with the aristocrats in Central Tibet, the only one we can think about is the Dasang Jande. Tsaron Dasang Jande, yeah, because he was a favorite of the Dalai Lama, so he was given the title Tsaron and married the widow, yeah. So that's the only case. But in Kham seemed to be much more prominent. I think this has a lot to do with the inheritance, yeah. Also the Chinese ethnologist, he actually said that the abstract concept of house, it matters more than bloodline. And so this gave the families more leverage. One of my colleagues in Sichuan University, Professor Li Jing, he did a very good study about one of the Nyarong Muping. I think Ben Dian wrote about it. And so she did a very good job and to look at the social structure. I think her work gave me some inspiration, but I probably need to do more research to really develop it as a more or less like a theory to explain.
Just a big thank you again. Coming all this way, avoiding the cyclone, dodging the cyclone in Hong Kong. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.